Are you looking for help with your rest and recovery, wanting to optimize your sleep and prime performance? Well, New Calm is built on neuroscience, and it's been used by special operators, SportTAC, pro sports teams, and many, many more for years. To learn more and access the best deals of the year, go to newcalm.co/grit. That's Newcalm, NUCALM.co/grit. We often talk about service and identity beyond the badge. Valor Technical Cleaning is a veteran-owned, nationwide biohazard remediation company hiring active and retired officers for business development roles. With Valor, you can build relationships with local agencies and continue to foster care for the community following tragedy. Continue serving, just in a new way. Visit valortechnicalcleaning.com and click Careers. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. We often talk about police as far as how can we be effective. We talk about how can we be effective with our teams, and that often goes to leadership, that goes to trust building, and that goes to communication. And it's not just in our ranks, it's outside, it's with the public, because we do have this team element with the public that we are trying to serve and we're trying to work with. So I'm very excited to bring our guest today. She runs a lot of training and curriculum that help our law enforcement agencies be more successful. And I do want to share this compliment with you, Julie, before we get going. A couple things. One, you and your company and your offerings came personally recommended by a couple police leaders that I really respect in the space, along the lines of, hey, you're in mid-management and you do interact with the public and you do have to keep this stuff in mind. If you ever get a chance to go to one of her trainings, you should definitely try to go. The second compliment is I had a boss go to IACP recently, and he said he tried to attend. He did attend your presentation. However, it was standing room only, and the crowd was filling into the hallway with people just standing outside the doorway listening, which is very impactful. So I want to share those two things and welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much. This is a good way to start. I'm going to come on weekly.
Yeah, there you go. Who doesn't want to get complimented like right off the bat on the beginning of a conversation? So can you tell us, Julie, a little bit about yourself and how you got into speaking on this and your background there?
I started in the media. I was a reporter and anchor in Washington, D.C. at a time when you make it to that market, you just think that is your future. Made it to a
Hmm.
top 10 market, very cool job, got to cover a lot of amazing things, a lot of dark things too. And I don't think I would have started looking had I not been recruited by the first police department where I would wind up working. And the person who brought me in was a major at the time in College Park. University of Maryland is where I attended, and that was his area that he was in charge of. And so covering stories, I got to know him. And Kevin Davis is a persuasive guy. He's been a police chief and commissioner at multiple agencies, currently with Fairfax County PD, which interestingly enough would later become my second agency, not when he was there. And he promised me a government job. He said, you don't have to work, you're smiling, you don't have to work in this newsroom where you're out at all hours and you're working on holidays and you've got young girls and you want to go to their swim meets and their soccer games. And this government life is for you. And I said, no, 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 for 2 years. And finally I said, okay, I'm in because I was, I'm a working mom and I want to be with my kids.
Hmm.
So he suckered me into this profession is what
He's a
happened because
salesman. He's a
anyone
recruiter.
who works in law enforcement knows he was a liar because for those 5 years that I worked at the Prince George's County Police Department right outside Washington, D.C., I worked on average 60 to 70 hours a week. They
Oh my
didn't
gosh.
make me, but I came at a time where I really felt like I had to prove myself. It was 2011, so think about that in the grand scheme of policing, 3 years before Ferguson.
Mhm.
I didn't know anything about law enforcement other than my godfather was a state trooper in New York. Nothing else, no other ties whatsoever. I love covering law enforcement because I like cops. I like their direct way, their just their vibe. I think in part because I came from New York and there's that, we're
Mm.
gonna just tell you the way that it is. And so
Yeah.
I always liked working with them, but never did I imagine, okay, you're gonna go be in charge of a an organization's reputation and one that at the time wasn't stellar. That's
Yeah.
how I got in.
Yeah, what a crash course. Thank you for that. And yeah, you did get suckered in, but it's like with policing so much it's like the call, and maybe the call for you came in this extremely persuasive chief, as you said. Um but certainly I like how you also resonate with, no one made you work that much, but you recognize like the need for you to step up. Which I think that will really resonate with those listening in that clicked based on the headline, right? Um, of the episode, which would be in the vein of PIOs, in the vein of administrators, and then anyone who cares about community engagement and just that messaging. Like this is going to be extremely impactful. And so, although some of the questions and conversations might be specific to like an official role, I think everyone can recognize there is some degree of you are a public official, you are a public servant when you're out there talking to one person or 10, formally, informally, like you're carrying these themes that are so critical. And so I asked Julie a little bit, like a couple prompts, and this is generally unscripted, but one thing I want your expert opinion on is like, where do we go wrong frequently? And you can take that wherever you want. That could be social media, that can be just press conferences, but where are police professionals frequently misstepping?
I'll start by saying this profession has grown tremendously since 2011. The change has been dramatic. Ask anyone who works in it, whether professional staff or sworn. Law enforcement has gotten so much better in public information sharing. There is still there is still work to be done, to be very
Hmm.
clear. But I'll share a story from when I first started presenting as a guest lecturer at the FBI National Academy in 2012. And I didn't really know what it meant to be at the FBI National Academy. Of course, I knew the FBI, but the
Hmm.
NA was unknown to me. And again, Kevin Davis encouraged me to go there and share this philosophy that I had, which I still use to this day. It's called "Run It Like a Newsroom." And whether you are a police department of 10 or 5,000, the concept in my mind and the best way for law enforcement to communicate with the public is the concept of we are going to be the source of the news. We are going to be the ones to share that news with you, good, bad, or indifferent first. And we're going to tell that story in a really impactful way, not a 1997 era news release with 3 lines. We are going to communicate like we are humans, and the public is going to hopefully give us a fair shake because we are making that effort. And when I walked into the National Academy for the first time, and they're in their green shirts and their khaki pants, and they're sitting there looking at me, and I'm saying, we need to tweet because we were tweeting then. We need to tweet about our homicides. We need to tweet about our OISs. We need to be the first ones to break the news about the OIS, not the TV station, radio station, newspaper. And they looked at me like you can picture their faces, just this blank face looking at me. And
Hmm.
I think I was there for 2 hours. I didn't give them a single break because I wanted to offer them value. And I didn't know that cops liked breaks. I learned my
Oh, they
lesson
love
quickly after
breaks.
that.
Yeah.
But when we were done, a line came to the up at the front of the room to talk to me. And everyone is eager and they have smiles on their faces and they've got energy and they're asking questions. And I basically said to all of them, where were you for the last 2 hours when I'm looking out into this crowd of these blank faces? And they're like, oh, those are just our faces. And it was very informative because I never got rattled after that incident. I never got rattled again. Like, okay, this is what you do. You're deciding whether I'm full of it, and
Hmm.
you are evaluating the information, and you're just not going to give up in this group setting. You're not going to give up how you feel about it. Even that changed because I spent 10 years at the National Academy devoting my time there, driving down 95 to go sit in multiple sessions. And as time passed, and as the concept of public information will help us, and long the faces changed. They started being more receptive. They would smile and nod and laugh. And that's just my anecdotal evidence that the profession became more open to the notion that telling our own story is beneficial.
Okay, so you said a couple things of things to do. It's share your story. I think we could get really philosophical there of owning your story and knowing what that is and putting that out in the world, but also to be human, right? And so to avoid being robotic, to avoid what we've seen before from yesteryear. And what we've seen before from yesteryear still exists today. So I think it's helpful for people to make that recognition. Now, what do you say to those that do cringe and they do get uncomfortable with the, yeah, you're going to share all the violent crimes, this and that, because some of the counterpoint is, well, we don't want to like shed light on how much crime there is. And maybe if we're not talking about it, maybe people aren't talking about it. Because sometimes you do see that with a new local news cycle.
People are talking about it. Trust and know that even if you don't see it, you don't feel it at the PD or the sheriff's office, get on social media and search for your agency's name or search for your sheriff or your chief. People are talking about you. And when you're not a part of the conversation, very often the assumption will be either you don't care, you've done something wrong, you're guilty, or you just don't find that we the public mean enough to you that you need to share. And so I would say there are opportunities for improvement in that there are still leaders who don't appreciate the magnitude of the power of social media and how it can steamroll you if you don't appreciate the way that mis and disinformation can take off. And there's no question today, there shouldn't be a question in 2026 that every single law enforcement agency should be actively posting on social media. I would argue it's more important for you to focus on social media than the traditional media. And I'm saying that as a former member of the media. I'm
Yeah.
not saying disregard the media, don't don't work with them, but we always advise people, if you have news to break, do it first on social media. That way, the media gets it as at the same time as everybody else. You're not giving preferential treatment to the media. You'll accommodate interviews. You'll do a news conference if necessary, but you get that news out as fast as possible on social where your story is already breaking potentially without you.
Yeah, that's huge. I love how you say that because I smirked and I might have like laughed a little bit when you said people are talking anyway. And when we think about like the masses that might be seeing something, well, what about the people in the neighborhood who is it's affected, right? If you live in these apartments and there was a shooting and you're not talking, the local police department's not saying anything, that could make you pretty concerned to the examples that you provided. In addition to that, I love how you recognize how critical this is. Like everyone uses social media, and if they don't, everyone they know certainly does. And so it makes me think about the concept of a force multiplier, just like emerging technology, like having a drone fly overhead. It gives you so much more that one officer or 10 officers couldn't see, right? So when you have that ability to share your story, have people access you, whether you have the followers or not. It's out there, right? And I also like how you outline. Let's not discount the media. Let's not ignore them, but let's focus our effort here because that is what we can control, and that goes to a lot of the higher level concepts we talk about here, which is focus on your locus of control And then outside of that, you will have some influence, but don't worry about stuff you can't control.
What I have found, not only working for both the PGPD and Fairfax County PD in Northern Virginia, and now as a crisis communications advisor, where the majority of our business is law enforcement and other government agencies, that even when the news that you have to share is bad, meaning either some form of violent crime or even someone on your agency has done something wrong, in our experience, when you are as forthcoming as possible about what happened, about what you're doing about what happened, if there's something that the public can do to help with whatever happened, and how you hope to prevent that from happening in the future, credibility and trust grows. Your reputation can still improve even when you're talking about negative issues. It's how you present the information and whether you do it without someone catching you. Don't wait for the media to
Hmm.
come to you and say, "Did this thing happen?" Break your own news, because I always liken it to when I was a kid, a teenager. Hypothetically speaking, let's say I
Hmm.
took some of my parents' alcohol and
I
stuffed it in
think
my
this is something
closet.
a lot of the listeners could connect with. Yeah.
They would catch me inevitably, and I would be busted. And then no matter what I said, you're caught red-handed, your credibility is shot. If I had taken the variety of alcohols and come forward and said, "I screwed up, I did this, I shouldn't have done it," the groundings that I received would have been shorter than the lengthier versions I experienced in high school. The same concept generally applies. If you are breaking your own news, coming forward with something that people actually might not expect you'd share willingly, it changes people's perception of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. And I like how you outlined that because my next point or question was going to be what about the controversial stuff? And we know that there's so much value in ownership. I think most anyone that's listening to this show and ones like it do value that. At the same time, there's like a group ownership and there's this value of trust and transparency, and they go hand in hand. However, sometimes you do see this debate. You can almost see the struggle in a leader or an agency, the share versus overshare. And we see examples of undershare. We see clear examples of overshare. What advice would you give people that are trying to develop that message, whether it's an administrator, maybe it's a sheriff partnering with, county executive to try to craft this message with their media team?
What does the public want to know? You do not need to get into the minutia. Be prepared to be asked about it. But generally speaking, what should the public know? And I think for me, as a former media relations director, I just relied on what I learned as a journalist. So the questions are always who, what, where, when, why, and how. If you answer those 6 questions, you've already got a pretty robust statement. But I would add to that that if this is coming from a leader, we need to hear from that leader where he or she sounds genuine and authentic. People can cut through BS like there's no tomorrow now. Social media will come for you if you're not being real. People are very savvy to what is nonsense, including what is AI nonsense. So
Hmm.
allowing, for example, AI to push out your posts on social media, how many posts do you see on social media that are clearly AI generated? I just go scrolling past because it's not
Hmm.
you. It's like you hired a PR firm to put together something for you. It's not genuine. I don't have time for it and I'm not interested. And so I think leaders need to get some of their personalities out there more. And they are more likely these days, as compared to 2011 when I started, to let down the veil, to be authentic, to share feelings. It's okay to say that you're upset with how this played out, that you are angry that this situation occurred, and here's what you're doing about it. We don't see enough of that real, authentic leadership, and we see more of it, but I think there's room to grow.
Yeah, you said it right there, which is that authenticity. And I have a personal frustration with AI right now being in I hate to call it content creation, but I create content, I write, I podcast, right? And so you do see so much of those posts that are just like it's like one line spaced down, tab down, and there's like a million emojis. Like who has the time to do emojis? You're not doing it on your computer. You're not fumbling with your thumbs to toggle back and forth between emojis and free text. So it does get to be a lot. It looks pretty at first, but it is so much that you know it's not real and people want real, right? And so I love how you it goes back to that earlier point you made, which is like to be human. And it does mean sometimes that we are imperfect, right? We're human, but people
Yes.
can see that. However, I can think of an earlier edition of AI where it was a, I'm not really trying to make fun of. I'm just trying to bring up this example that a lot of people might remember, which is, kind of like a drug bust. And then they used AI to put their department patch in the thing rather than using something like Photoshop, and it actually changed some of the image, right? It changed some of the text to something that was like nonsense language, and then it changed an object, and then it looked completely doctored, right? Like it looked like a completely fake image where they did have the right intent. I believe that, right? They just had a seizure. They wanted to remove something. They wanted to add something. Let's use AI. But AI has come a bit of a ways. It will continue to evolve. However, we we need to recognize that it has to be our final work product. And if you are using AI in any capacity, you got to be able to stand behind it and assume the worst. And I almost feel like there's more work going over something like that with a fine tooth comb than to just do it your way the first time.
Agree, and your credibility takes such a hit if that goes out to the public. You need
Hmm.
multiple eyes. I mean, we say it at Julie Parker Communications. No one should be publishing any piece of content, any report, anything without at least one other person on the team looking at that, proofreading that, not just strategically thinking, but down to the punctuation. Because every single thing a law enforcement agency puts out to the public can and should be the best product it possibly can be.
From interviews to jail calls, Ditto Transcripts delivers fast, confidential, and court ready transcription for law enforcement agencies. Ditto is CJIS compliant and is already working with agencies all over the U.S., including the Washington State Patrol and the National Park Service Investigations Unit. Get started now at dittotranscripts.com. That's dittotranscripts.com. To hear details about all the applications of Ditto transcripts and exactly why this is a key solution for your organization's workload issues, check out episode 232.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think about even the simpler versions of that, where I've had a prior boss that would pitch me over an email because he knew I had these are the not so cool traits. He had a knack, I had a knack for proofreading, right? I can see little grammar things and kind of
Big.
miss wordings. Like I just glom onto it really easily because he wants the message to be effective. And so he'd pitch to me. I'd be happy to look at it. I'd say, "Hey, is this what you meant?" He's like, "No." I was like, "Well, it reads that way to me." And so it's a team, right? And I love that
Yes.
aspect. I think it could be hard for a lot of people, whether it's a small department and you have a few people on ancillary duties. Some people are working, some people aren't. Any hacks for whether it's that small department where it's extra hats doing that type of social media or engagement role versus a full time large scale department? Maybe they have several full time people, but the challenges might be very similar.
A couple of ideas. One is, especially if you're a small agency, try to reach out outside your circle. So, in that city or county, wherever your organization sits, is there someone that has a knack like you do for identifying, let's say, grammatical issues, but also listening for tone? And it can be a comms person, doesn't necessarily have to be. And I would argue someone else's perspective outside law enforcement, especially when it comes to something controversial, can be incredibly helpful because they are acting as the layperson, the person who would be receiving this news. And if they don't have a law enforcement background, maybe that's better. Maybe what you're saying makes no sense to me because I don't get this jargon. Can you make
Mm,
this piece clearer? And I would also say that if there is no one like that, think about if of course it doesn't have to be our firm, but if there is a law enforcement communications professional who you could either bring on in a small capacity or certainly in a crisis. This is why we exist. We are experts in this arena. Not everybody is. When you started as a police officer, were you like, I'm going to be really good at public information? No, that's not why typically you get into it. Now, you may have those skills, but it's okay for leaders to recognize this is not my forte. Let me outsource this. We work
Mhm.
with agencies as small as 50 sworn up to thousands. And so think outside the box. If there's a need that you have and you can't with your current team provide it, okay, let's get crafty.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that because a lot of that was stuff that we recognized in recruiting because so much of our recruiting strategy was to put our own story out there, reach people where they're at, get on different social media platforms that were being underutilized or not utilized, right? And so part of that goes to knowing your audience, who is your target? And that can be kind of tricky for this type of role, I think, because you are trying to reach everybody. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as you establish tone and you have this sense of your brand, like what your police department or agency is all about.
You bring up a good point, which is audience. And we always encourage, let's say it's a leader writing a speech or overseeing a news release. Who exactly are you speaking to? It's easy to say everybody. Well,
Mhm.
there are moments when a leader needs to put out a message that really he or she is talking to his or her officers,
Yes.
or at least hitting a few key points that he or she wants the officers to hear. But let's say you are a university police chief. Your audience is very different than the sheriff who oversees an entire county. You are talking to students, staff, faculty, alum. Your messaging should be written and composed thinking through who you're speaking to because the language should differ. It shouldn't just be generic public. If you're talking about violent crime, let's say in your county, and you're working on a year end message about crime stats that year, yes, your audience is much more broad, but I would encourage, for example, in that instance, to be thinking about some of the victims and the victims' families who
Mhm.
experienced that violent crime. Because if you think about them, you're going to write that message, you're going to present that message differently than rather than you're just talking to generic public in the US.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really tangible examples. I love that because it helps you kind of zoom in. And you also brought up the very key thing that I think cuts us a lot of times in the industry where we focus so much on the outside, but you know who's reading every word or listening to that soundbite or sharing it around after roll call, like the video on YouTube is everyone that works under your direction, your command. And I don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's intentionally two-faced. It is over investing on one perspective, but then losing how that can be taken out of context or with a different context. And it kind of goes to the thought of it's a balance, right? Because you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. But I think that it is helpful if you take the pauses and you consider what Julie shared about like how do you consider this message. Also, to skip back a little bit, when you bring in this outside view, because cops hanging out with cops, we start thinking and talking like cops, and it becomes like an echo chamber where we understand and we have this intuition on what we're trying to say. But then to bring someone else from the other city department, perhaps, or bring in someone from a whole different perspective, and maybe someone from the group that you're trying to appeal to, right? So that's the value of having these community partners that so many people talk about. And I wonder how much those are utilized.
My chief at the first agency had a very robust citizens advisory panel, and we would
Mm,
meet and I would join that dinner once a month and talk with the members. When we had something big to discuss, whether it was violent crime or trends, what we're doing, a new piece of equipment, whatever it was, that if it was important enough, he would run it past them to get their various takes. Again, they are a subset of your broader audience. Yes, they're friendly to you because they're a part of your citizens advisory panel, but it's an excellent opportunity and they feel empowered when they get a chance to hear a potential message and maybe even help shape a potential message, we called on them very often for their perspective, and I know it was a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So you brought it up earlier with crisis. Are there different rules at play or different guidelines you'd have people think about?
That's a broad question. I
It certainly is.
will I will touch on a couple of key points, one of which is urgency. I still think that there is a long way to go for some in appreciating the fact that every minute that ticks by where you have not messaged in any real way, shape, or form, because of the way social media is today, that mis and disinformation grows so rapidly. The fake narrative takes hold so quickly. And the longer you wait to get out and put your stamp on this crisis and say, we are responding, we are informing, whatever it is that you're doing, the longer the silence is allowed to sit, the more trouble you will have of managing that narrative. You'll hear often in law enforcement, we're going to control the narrative. You're probably not. You can manage it for
Mhm.
sure if you treat a crisis with the respect that it deserves when it comes to publicly sharing information. It is extremely difficult today to control a narrative. So
Yeah.
urgency is one thing.
Mhm.
Being authentic and genuine is another. And I'll call upon a trend that I'm seeing that I do not love. And if police leaders have the ability to push back, then I would encourage them to do so. I get that elected officials are the bosses, whether it's a board of supervisors, a mayor, in some cases, a city manager. When something big happens and the public is waiting to hear from law enforcement, this is not just because I was a reporter or not just because I was a police media relations director. Few things frustrate me more as a crisis communications advisor than seeing a news conference begin from an elected official's perspective. Everyone is waiting to hear from law enforcement about the magnitude of this crisis, the status of the suspect, how the officers are doing, how the victims are. We we generally know what an elected official is going to say.
Mhm.
Only certain things that they can and should say. Please, if you're an elected official, allow law enforcement to lead as a crisis is unfolding. You can go, you can share your important perspective and what you want to say to your community, but everyone is tuning in to hear from law enforcement. So allow them to lead that news conference with the critical information that may include the fact that a suspect is still on the loose and what the public needs to do about it. It seems to be a trend recently where more and more elected officials are leading these news conferences. I don't think it's a great trend.
Yeah, even as you say that, that's interesting because I'm picturing all these, little news briefs and conferences and headlines and screenshots, and I feel like regardless of whether it's specific to policing or a large incident or a large scale crisis, it feels like it's like the script is like the biggest elected official, the with the most reach or whatever, will kick things off, and then it kind of tears down, and now this person, and now the deputy mayor or something like that. And now let's bring in the police chief. And it does send this different, I mean, there's so much more that can happen in that time for the viewer of like the tone could be established completely differently away from the crisis. It might be like, hey, we're thinking about all the communities and this and that, but we still don't really know what happened. And so that's just an interesting thing, I think, for people to think about. I don't know how many elected or public officials in that capacity are listening in, but I think it is an opportunity to have those conversations if you're in emergency management or you're on the police side or the fire side to say, hey boss, what about this? And then, we get out the critical information why most people are here. And then please, yeah, do speak to the residents and do speak to some of these bigger trends and missions and all these things that we're trying to do here.
I don't think it benefits the elected official by going first. I get that
Hmm.
there is In some cases, there's ego involved. But when this incident is unfolding, it should not be about people's egos. It should be about what is the information we need to get out immediately. Allow them still to have their time to speak. But if I'm a law enforcement leader today, I'm going to have that conversation with my elected official today before the crisis hits. Hey, if something happens, here's how I'd like to see this play out, and talk about order and who should speak. And can we not have 12 speakers? We don't need 12 speakers. We don't
Hmm.
need 8 speakers. We need the key leaders to get out information that matters most.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. Have you seen examples of, as I'm just sitting here thinking about it, like, have you had examples where perhaps the politician opens it, like, super briefly, like, "Thank you all for coming. This is a really tragic day, and I'm gonna turn it over," kinda to instill this calm and maybe, like, I'm the leader, so I'm stepping up, but I'm also now deferring to and I'm asking my, my counterpart/designee slash designee in this space to speak. Have you seen something like that?
I generally, the instances that I'm thinking of, if there's an elected official at the mic and they're going first, they're generally not quick to give up the mic,
Mhm. Yeah.
which is why I always advocate for, in a law enforcement matter, the law enforcement leader should lead.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. Okay, so we started with this, or we just left off with this really high level, generally like an administrator type of conversation. What kind of tips would you like the officer, boots on the ground, and maybe they find themselves in the community meeting, or maybe they find themselves doing a school presentation where the staff's asking something? Because I do really want this message to be readily accessible to everyone. I think it will be, but just to really underline some of those key points or tips that you would offer to those that are actually interacting with the most public on the day to day.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of training for mid-level supervisors, sergeants, lieutenants, so that they can trickle down
Mm,
to the officers out on the street what kind of information we want to share. And it goes back, for me, it goes back to news. What is newsworthy? And if the thing itself, let's say it's shop with a cop or it's coffee with a cop, everyone does that. That in and of itself isn't especially newsworthy. But if you can find an interesting angle, if you can take really beautiful photos or quality video, if you can create the content so that it doesn't read like every other PD's shop with a cop or coffee with a cop event, you have a chance of having your content stand out. We worked with a client recently, which is a small PD, 50 officers, and they had a shop with a cop event. We had video and we spliced together a reel. Again, this is not an unusual slash newsworthy event, but the way that it was presented was engaging. It was fast moving. It tugged at your heartstrings, and it did incredibly well. Don't undermine the power of a really well told story. And sometimes when people will send in photos, officers out on the street will send in photos. Give some nuggets of information with those photos. You
Mhm.
were there, so you know what that photo represents. But what if you say, that's the big sister, we got approval from the parents, and she's holding the hand of her little brother as they walked up to meet this police officer who they see every day. Like, we've got to get the storytelling as part of our content creation, because our computers, everything is pulling at us in different directions. And to make people stop scrolling, you've got to have good images, a story that will hook you immediately, or video. And you need, I'm not going to say experts in your PIO office, but that if you can get yourself a quality PIO, they are worth their weight in gold.
Mm.
Do what it takes to find the storytellers on your agency. And even if they're not the PIO, connect them with the public information office, so that that lieutenant or sergeant or corporal out there on the streets is always thinking, as they do their job, where are the stories?
What about civilian role PIOs versus sworn? Because you were the civilian. Clearly, with a extremely in-depth media background. Sometimes you don't always have that, but they have other background traits, awareness of social media and all these different things. Like what insights do you have in that respect when people are trying to weigh that out?
My favorite version of a public information office is a hybrid shop.
Mm,
That's where I came from. I love the mix of either former journalists, people who have worked in public relations, anyone who's good at telling a story, combined with the power of the sworn officer who knows that profession far better than certainly I did. And when you put those two different perspectives together, you really can create powerful content. And there are certain stories where it makes sense for someone who is not sworn to go out and share information. And there are instances where it should be the uniform that's out there talking to the public, talking to the media. If you don't have a budget, let's say, for both, there are so many agencies in this country where they're lucky to have one full-time PIO. Very often it's an officer who's splitting time between PIO duties and, sergeant of whatever, overseeing
mhm,
burglary investigations,
yeah,
whatever the
mhm,
case may be. I can't emphasize enough that if you have the ability to put resources into your public information office, I think it pays dividends. And I know budgets are tight and I know resources are tight. But think about when you lose public confidence and the amount of time, resources, money that gets thrown at that problem to try to fix it. If instead you come out of the gates with a strong public information office, it's not to say you're not going to wind up dealing with challenges and controversies. You probably will. But it is a piece of the police department, of the sheriff's office that thankfully today people recognize this is a critical role in law enforcement. It's not a nice to have. It's a it's a must in my mind.
yeah, I love that. I mean, I know it's probably tenuous for a lot of agencies to bring more people in, but even for the ancillary, I like that idea where you have both. You have that hybrid model. You have the expert in one realm, which might be policing. It might be a 15-year officer or supervisor that has that acumen, but then you have someone that has spent the majority of all their life as a civilian. So they read things like a civilian, they write things like a civilian.
Yes.
So knowing your audience and then kind of meshing that together. I love that aspect of teamwork that you outline. Um, I have heard this numerous times in my career where certain officers of all ranks and all places get really apprehensive about sharing that good feel good story, or they're like, well, I don't want to do it for the PR. And from my recruiting standpoint, it was like, well, you don't do it for the PR, but since you're doing it, let's get credit for it. Do you have thoughts on that?
There were 4 words that stressed me out every time I heard them. It's no big deal. And it was a phenomenon. We, the agency, were doing all of these great things out there in the public. And either I'd hear about them through the grapevine, I'd see it on social media because someone in the public posted it. A member of the media would tell me they saw this great thing happen. And I would go to the cops involved and say, well, basically, you're killing me. And
Hmm.
they'd say, what? It's not a big deal. He's playing basketball. It's no big deal. And we know it is a big deal. And there's a way that you can put out this information without patting yourselves on the back. And that's where your communicators are worth their weight in gold because you've got to balance the showboaty factor
Hmm.
with telling a genuine, authentic story that will resonate with people. And you want all of these good stories before you need the benefit of the doubt because something either doesn't look good, something was lawful but awful. You are forbidden from giving out information when really you should be messaging, but for whatever reason you're not allowed. You need that benefit of the doubt. The way you get the benefit of the doubt is for people to feel like they know your organization, they trust your organization, and ideally, the ones that you serve and protect are going to wait for the facts to come out before rushing to judgment.
Yeah, I love that. It just shows how multidisciplined these types of conversations are about building trust, building team. I mean, we're building team with the community. Like we are of the community. That was the whole point of this. So even with the officers that says it's not a big deal, I would invite those officers to rewind back to before they were a police officer, when they were, let's say, 17, 19, even if they're 25 and they had a career change. They're like, man, I would love to do this important thing. And then if it wasn't you and you weren't in the job yet, would you think that was pretty cool? And if it was a police officer playing basketball or throwing a football, you'd be like, yeah, that's really cool. I wish more cops would do that. And then similarly, if you did a hostage rescue, like even though you might have been a part of a team that did 5 in your career, it is a big deal. And right. So recognize
Yes.
that, step out of that. It's not about you. It's about the profession. It's about the community. And so thinking about it that way, I think can be really helpful. And then a lot of the tenets that you've illustrated so well do translate to all the leadership discussions we have, which are what you just said was essentially making deposits and withdrawals, right? Like leadership capital. And so you are recognizing you're a leader in the community as a police officer, as a police professional. You're constantly making deposits and withdrawals. Something doesn't go so well, that's a withdrawal. But those deposits are so critical because when people withdraw, they withdraw in masses, right? Like public trust. Like when we screw up as a profession, and like, don't get defensive, we do. We are all here talking about it so that we can be the best we can practically, is there's a lot of withdrawal, and we have to make sure that we're making those regular deposits through the good work we do every day, because that's what the thing is.
You nailed it.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. I would love to keep you, but also I want to be mindful of time. So, is there anything that you'd like to leave the listeners with in summary? And please do tell us where we can find out more about you, your company.
I would say, to sum it up, focus on becoming the source of your news. Don't shake your fist at the bad reporter or the bad media outlet that didn't tell the story well. You've got all the tools right in front of you in your hand. That phone, that computer, that is how you become the source of your news. Don't eliminate the media, but realize that the power of social media is actually stronger today than the traditional media. People can contact us through julieparkerco.com. We launched in October of last year, JPCU, or Julie Parker Communications University. On there, we have leaders, we have communicators, we have middle management. And on that platform, we talk about things like this: sharing your story, how to do it better, how to navigate a crisis, how to improve your brand on LinkedIn, your personal brand. So I'd encourage people to find us there for a ton of free resources, webinars, content.
Love it. And that will be available in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.